of surname, Ram Gidumal first. Ram is an extraordinary man, both an extraordinary businessman and an extraordinary human being in the following way. Ram arrived in the UK at the age of 17, if I remember correctly, and as a refugee from Kenya of Asian origin, and by the age of 37 had made enough money to retire, only just, but enough money to retire. And as he says, it wasn't because he'd made tons of money, but because the concept of enough had come to rest in his heart. And so he decided that enough is enough, and he should spend the rest of his life living on that enough to make a difference for uh, making humanity, leaving the world in a better place, contributing to humaneness and humanity, which is what he has done since the age of 37. So that's more than half his life now. Helping young entrepreneurs, fighting for the rights of women, raising money for charity, over $1 billion now in various ways and forms. And so both from the point of view of being a businessman and from the point of view of his philanthropic contributions to humanity, his social entrepreneurship, he's really got quite an extraordinary record. And then, of course, Stephen Hyler. Stephen is another extraordinary human being, in my view, who arrived in India on his 20th birthday and fell in love with India, as a result of which he has spent an average of 4 months every year in India over the last 53 or so years, in which he has visited almost every single district in the country. And I do not know any other foreigner, or for that matter, any other Indian who has done that. And why has he visited every single district in the country? Because he is an ethnologist. That is to say, he's somebody who records the lives of people. And so he has been recording what our people are like, what their clothes are like, what their houses are like, what their music is like, what their dance is like, and so on. And as you know, India is a land of such incredible diversity that, of course, there is a lot to photograph or film, as the case may be. He has made films as well, of course. He now has something like 250,000 very good quality photographs because he is a professional photographer, and his work has been featured in his photography has been featured in major museums around the world. He has also curated exhibitions of Indian art and Indian craft, and he will, of course, speak to part of that as we go through. Long introductions, I'm sorry, but I hope they do some tiny bit of justice to both of them. So may I start our discussion, Ram, by inviting you, please, to tell us, in your extensive experience in growing up in Kenya, and then, of course, in the UK, and then your international travels, both as a businessman and as a social entrepreneur, philanthropist, one perhaps experience which crystallizes to your mind the theme of one humanity, one experience that you had which really drove home to you that we may be black or white, left wing or right wing, rich or poor, actually we are one humanity.
Wow, it's huge because there are so many different perspectives on one humanity for me. But I suppose it was when my children were going to get married. I come from the Sindhi community, the Indian community. Even though we were in Kenya, we retained our Indianness. We came to London, we retained our Indianness. But when we came to live in London, we were now engaging with a range of other cultures, easy behind the corner shop counter because you still retain what you have. But when my children wanted to get married, one of them, the eldest one, met an English girl. The daughter met a Swedish boy. The youngest son met a Hungarian Jewish girl. But the extended family hadn't yet made that adjustment. So I really had to try and communicate to them this issue of oneness. Look, we are all human beings, for goodness sake. So what if my daughter-in-law to be is English, or my son-in-law to be is Swedish? And I remember using this expression, we've all got 5 fingers, we've all got 5 toes or whatever, 10 fingers, toes, thumbs. Look, we are human beings in essence. So why? Because they were perplexed. How could that happen? How could you allow that? So that the first experience of my daughter actually meeting a Swedish boy, that was the first time I had to now confront with my family this bigger issue. In small ways, I'd done it for myself, but that now was big. This is marriage. This is communities now beginning to exchange, engage with each other. Swedes coming into our home. Hungarian Jewish people coming into our home because they want to meet the family. Now, that was a very, very, and it was
So
challenging.
what did you find most difficult to deal with in your extended family, if you feel able to share that? What did you
Well,
find most difficult to deal with in communicating this?
well, I can tell you that even before the big difference of Swede, Hungarian Jewish, and English, when I met my wife to be, I was challenged. You must marry another Indian. Okay. She must be from the same community as us. I ticked those 2 boxes. But then they discovered, ooh, she's from a different caste. I said,
So within the same community, but a
within the
different
same
caste.
community. They said, she's a different caste. And I was shocked. I said, but, you asked me to find someone from the same community. And they were very, both sides, her family were upset. How could you all do that? She's a different caste. She's from the professional civil service caste. We are from the business caste. In fact, it was, if I could use the word now very openly, even worse than that, the untouchable caste. We were like a funeral bearers. That still wasn't revealed at the time we both families met, but it became clear. They do their research. This is, it's reducing our reputation. And my family saying, hey, you trying to marry into them is reducing our reputation. Both could not see. Same color, same community, same place of origin. Hyderabad, Sindh in India, British India, now Pakistan, but British India at the time. And so that really that was my first beginning of trying to see what is the difference? Why is there such a strong feeling about this issue? What is it? And that prepared me, I suppose, for the bigger one when it came to, I wasn't as afraid, but even then afraid. I said, goodness me, they had a problem with another Sindhi girl from a different caste. How will they react to a Swede, an English girl, a Hungarian Jewish girl? It was like, this is going to be tough. And that crystallizes the mind about who am I? Where am I from? What is my identity? And,
Indeed, sir.
and
Yes.
to challenge my wider family, think about this. But sadly, there's still many at the beginning of the journey. And I can tell you, Prabhu, how difficult it gets to the extent they're so afraid of the other that even cousins are marrying cousins to stay safe.
In the community, you mean?
In the community, yeah.
Yes.
So,
yes.
I'm marrying first cousins because that is safe. We cannot go beyond that because it's high risk. What's the risk, I keep saying? How do we? Now, their children, happily, who have now lived here for at least a generation and a half, are moving out, and that discomfort is beginning to be eased. But it's taken this, 50 years, 60 years. That's a long time to have that kind of feeling. But yes, it's very challenging.
Can I draw Stephen in at this point? Stephen, I've introduced you briefly, and you have had, of course, many, many experiences as well in relation to this theme of one humanity. What have you found useful? What experience would you like to share with us on this theme? But before you go there, Stephen, I do want to make an announcement for our participants. We've got into the discussion, which is great, but I think it's good at this point to just share with our participants that I will not be expecting them to participate by hand raising, which is quite common in webinars. I would like all our participants, please, to put your questions into the chat so that I can pick the questions up afterwards, when the time comes for our questions. And the whole meeting is being recorded, as you may have noticed. So I hope that'll be acceptable to everybody. So welcome to all our participants once again. Please remember the meeting is being recorded. Please remember, we don't need hand signals. Just put your questions in the chat and we will pick them up at the end. So Stephen, just to turn again to you, any experience which you think well illustrates the theme of one humanity?
I've been, Prabhu and Ram, and the rest of you, I've been so honored in my life to be able to travel as extensively as I have and to be accepted into Indian communities really throughout the country, even from my first days when I was 20. I just turned 20 as I entered and stayed in was in the Golden Temple in Amritsar from my 20th birthday. I was invited into homes, and I have been again and again. And for me, that experience is because I am a man I was a boy who is able to listen and be quiet without somehow intruding, even though without question I'm a tall white American male. I can't help but carry that identity with me. But for some reason, I am able to disarm people, that people don't feel overly protective around me. And so consequently, I think that the experience of being in a home where the young men were, when I was a young man, grouped with me with arms around me or head on my knee, which would not happen in the West, with children around my feet playing between my legs, and with older men sitting closer to me and bowing in to talk with me closely. And then the women seeing that harmony would open themselves. Sometimes, not infrequently, women who were behind the veil were recognized that I was being accepted as a member of the family, and so would open the veil. And those experiences, that idea that even as someone who was from such a different culture, such a different experience, could be accepted in so warmly that experience is the kernel of my life. I just, as you know, traveled probably through India, launching and lecturing about my new book that you've kindly published. What I was again and again floored by was that sense that people didn't feel I was other. There was
Mhm.
not that sense of otherness, even among the young. I did not expect the 18 to 26-year-olds to so warmly welcome me. I'm 73, in as someone that could help them with their careers, who could help guide them in ways that might be helpful to them. And that idea that I've often been in circumstances before 25 years ago, because it's 53 years that I've been in India, before 25 years ago, where I was the only foreigner they had ever seen. And before television, before lots of media, well, I'm going to use the word intrusion upon the community, but that's maybe a wrong word because of its judgment. I don't mean that from that standpoint as being a negative, but the change. I was the only foreigner they'd ever met, and still there was that welcome, that kindness, even though I
And the
might have.
interest
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
and the interesting thing that is that it was from all strata of society, all different parts of the country. There were Maharajas, and there were
Everywhere.
gardeners, and there were outcasts, and there were all kinds of people
Often
involved in it. Yes,
Dalits,
yeah.
often the leaders of society, often people who had worked with the Gandhiji or else others to fight for freedom, but also the people inside the Mumbai slums or uh, in villages that were so remote that the British really didn't have an effect there. And I those welcomings, that warmth, that kindness, the thoughtfulness, the generosity, I understand implicitly the Indian concept of dan, of giving, which is when I would thank anyone for their help, they would say, no, no. In English, they would say, no, no, it is my duty. I think that Westerners misunderstand that word. It is about reciprocity. I understand intrinsically It's about what you are doing with your life, Ram, is giving, is receiving, but giving back and finding ways to generate that oneness by acknowledging each other human being as valuable and seeing what can I do because I've been given so much. It's that. That's that concept of dawn, of the reciprocity of giving. That's what creates oneness.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. That's very helpful. And Ram, maybe if you don't mind, I wonder if you feel able to read an excerpt from your book to give us a sense of what your writing style is like and what you've written about and so on.
Sure. I mean, there's so much I could share. I don't know if it comes across clearly in the book, but there you go, My Silk Road. Does that come across? Maybe not, because the resolution will be difficult. But anyway, from this book, there's so much I could read, but this one I know communicates some of this feeling of oneness. Music. If there is one strand that has really helped bringing people together, to me, it's music. And here I write, music is evocative and powerful. Even back in pre-1947 India, music communicated a depth of strength and determination with leading Indian musicians publicizing songs loaded with symbolism. There was one about caged birds, poetically urging them to burn their cages and be set free, referring to the fight for Indian independence. Such nuances may have been missed by the British intelligence agencies, but clearly understood by those who were suffering. It should come as no surprise that music continues to break through the darkness of our world. For me, this new music was also loaded with meaning, like a microcosm of my own life, blending Christ, community, and my love of Indian culture. And being from the lowly caste of funeral singers, it felt particularly poignant. The label that had once defined my family as untouchable had come back to lift us up. God brings treasure out of the dust. Our family's heritage of Indian music was being fulfilled in a way I could never have imagined.
Thank you. That's actually a very moving excerpt. Thank you. And just thinking about that, the journey that your family has made from being untouchables at one point, and of course, professional musicians, but professional musicians of a rather low order, singing only at funerals, to where you are now. Obviously, it's taken a few generations for that to happen. But sadly, there are still people who have not made that journey. I don't mean particularly from your background, but generally in India, there are people from that sort of Dalit background who've still not made the journey. I don't mean to your level of society, but I mean found the liberation to fulfill their own talents and aspirations to whatever degree is appropriate for their level of talent. And that's still not happened because of oppression in our traditional societies. And this oppression, of course, takes different forms and in different parts of the country comes across in different ways. And indeed, even in societies from our communities abroad, it exists in different ways, different kinds of discrimination exist. And I want to speak particularly to the issue of discrimination against women in our culture. You've been, of course, fighting for a long time against discrimination for our women. Could you perhaps tell us where your motive, where your instinct, where your desire to help our women came from?
Sure. Well, it started at home. We were 11 of us, in fact, 15 of us, depending on how we define family, but let's take 11 immediately. 6 girls, 5 boys. I saw how we 5 boys were treated royally, like kings. The girls were there, but never had the same rights, never had the same freedom as we had. And to the extent that when they hit marriageable age, however define marriageable age, 16, 17, but then they knew by law 18 or 21, but even at 16 or 17 or 18, this fear of the other caused them to get the girls married by arranged marriage. So even though we were living in London, they were taken to Bombay, and very quickly, with minimal time or whatever, right, here's the boy, the family's match, go. And I'm thinking, hang on, yes, there was expectations for me to do the same, but I fought it. I said, I will not go through the same. But I watched the way the girls were treated, and that really got me. And then I read in London a newspaper headline about a young boy, the son of a billionaire. Maybe at that time he was a multi-millionaire, but today still the people are billionaires. He met a girl in Bombay from another caste, the Chichi caste, whatever that means. And his family wouldn't have it. So he eloped, to the extent, cutting a long story short, to the extent that when they tracked him in Mauritius, newspaper headlines, the boy went and bought took a empty liter bottle of thing, went to the petrol station, filled it with petrol, poured it on himself, on her, and burnt himself. Flown to London, couldn't be saved. And when I read that, I said, this is the extreme of what I've been sensing about discrimination. I shared about my own family, but I knew in the extended family, this was happening. Another aunt fell in love with the Muslim boy, Hindu, Muslim. Oh my goodness. Her brother beat her and kicked her to the point that she was found eventually in the every home has a temple in our family. In the temple, bottle of tablets gone. And I was a kid when I heard, but I'd forgotten about it. And then I remembered, I said, this has been, when I read this big story about the boy burning himself, I thought, boy, is this what happens when cultures don't understand each other and the fear of the other drives one to that kind of extreme? So it started for me at home when I saw the way in which girls were treated. And eventually in England, I picked up headlines, young Asian girls, attempted suicide rate 4 times the national average. And I was reading the headline about the billionaire son. I thought, right, I've got to do something. At that point, it triggered in me something, which was research it and write about it. A good friend, which includes you, Prabhu, but another one as well, Dr. Abraham, said, publish or perish. I thought I must write about this. I researched it and produced my first book, Sari and Chips, East and West, what happens when those cultures clash and crash. I really wrote that book, and boy, it started with the story of the billionaire's son, anonymously, and then went on to give all the different things that happened. A young girl in Birmingham, just for wearing jeans, Sikh family, she was murdered by her father. He was jailed, but even the story said as he went to jail and was on his way there, was applauded by the community because of what he stood up for. And so it's that kind of extreme. So really that's
but the point is you didn't stop there. You actually went on to do things, not just publish the book, of course.
Yeah.
Things we can't discuss online, but I do know that you've done a lot of practical things to help women in that sort of situation. And encouraged others to do it, and encouraged national action on the subject.
Probably one of the fundamental ways to do it was to publicize it. People were afraid to talk about it. No man was prepared to go on radio to talk about it. I decided I would do that. In fact, when I did my book, Radio 4, the Today program, called me, and I shared about what I'd written in the book and why. Initially, and in fact, that was an Asian radio station, actually, a lady called Ramola Bachchan, related to the famous Amitabh Bachchan, his sister-in-law. She interviewed me on a local Asian radio station, and that created a spark. And suddenly, national publications like the TES, and I was very pleased that it was the Times Educational Supplement for schools and education. And as people started reading about it, I know that a campaign then began. This is where I didn't even have to do anything. It took a young Asian girl who had suffered herself to start a charity, which then starts. You see, my role has very much been catalytic always. You do something, you start off a debate, you spark off discussions. This young lady took it on. And I said to myself, I'm a man fighting for this. It's brilliant that a young girl has decided to do this. And, but it unfortunately took time. It was a young Turkish girl murdered by her father. I don't know how many stab wounds in a bathtub. And then when the Today program called me, the police commissioner was there. I challenged him. I said, sir, this girl went to a police station. She was ignored. These things have been written about. surely you need to train your officers to cross-culturally sensitize themselves that when a young girl comes, they take it seriously and don't just say, get lost. And poor girl was told get lost and ended up in a bathtub with, I think it was 30 stab wounds or whatever, but she died. And many other cases, the school concerned, I challenged the teacher saying, hey, couldn't you have picked this up earlier in school when you saw this young girl struggling with life? Because these things have signs. So it's that kind of thing. So, but for me, it's been campaigning on the media to broadcast the issue and then seeing now who's going to pick it up. Because on my own, I can't do much. But to the extent I'm able to publicize it where people were afraid, to me, that was a huge lever, which then got others to join me, call me, invite me. The police commissioner invited me separately. Okay, what can we do? So training, talk about training. One of the charities I said of South Asian concern, we set up a training program. And the strategy was simple, A, B, C, D. Awareness, are you aware about who these different Asians are in your community? Muslim, Hindu, Sikh. Bridge building, how do you build bridges? How do you cross cultural divides? C. And then the D, for God's sake, do something. Don't just sit there. So it was something as simple as that. And suddenly they started taking note. So training courses were set up, material was written, curriculum prepared. It's got to come with education. And to me, that has been something I've really, really been motoring all the time on.
Thank you, Ram. That's very helpful. And Stephen, if I may bring you into the discussion, you have, of course, done a lot for the rights of our women, but in a completely different way. You've done it by identifying extraordinary things that some of our women have done, in spite of all the structures of oppression and so on. You've not talked about the structures of oppression and so on. You've talked about the extraordinary achievements they've done in spite of these structures of oppression, or in the middle of these structures.
It's not that I don't talk about the oppression. I do. But what I've been trying to do, my work, for those of you that don't know, I have written 3 books about women's identity in India. And what I try to do is give voice to the women. So what I realized a long time ago, because it's 53 years in India, that most people on the outside of India only know the women as the disparities, as the inequalities, as the injustices. And those injustices are, as Ram pointed out, they are happening everywhere. It's not simply in South Asia, it's everywhere in the world. So if we define a people, half of that population, by the inequalities I discovered and was told by countless Indian women, asked if I could bring to others awareness the strengths of Indian women. What is it that they do to overcome this adversity? What are the ways that they use their own creativity in order to redefine their own lives, but also those for their children, the opportunities for their children? What are the strengths? And so my books really are about giving voice to those women, letting them tell their own stories. And that has taken me into really, I mean, my work anyway, my cross-cultural survey took me into every district of India. But I then have returned interviewing more than 1,000 women throughout the subcontinent, really in every part, and from every age bracket and level of opportunity, of education or lack thereof, of being under the thumb of their husbands or their families, and those that might be considered emancipated, those that are educated and working out there in one or another of fields, or those that are still working very much within a more hidebound tradition. And what do they see themselves to be? What do they want to be known as? And I use art as a means for conveying that, because.
So tell us about one example of you using art to give voice to our women, if I may put it that way.
Well, one of the people that I've been so inspired by was a woman named Sonabai Rajwar in Chhattisgarh, in central India, in an extremely remote region, who married, again, an arranged marriage, was married to a widower considerably her elder. He was a farmer in a community that is closely knit, as most communities are in India. And he, with her help, they built a home outside his community's boundaries, way outside. And then once the building was finished, it had no exterior windows, which is common for Central Indian architecture. It had an interior courtyard and one door only. And he closed that door and didn't allow her out for 15 years, didn't allow anyone in, didn't allow anyone out. That was not a cultural mandate. That was his own psychosis for whatever reason. But during that period of time, they had a baby, a little son. She wanted to entertain that son. And so without any training whatsoever, she began to take clay from the edge of her interior well, the well inside the house, and to create sculptures as toys for her son. She found that she loved the sculpting process. Again, no training whatsoever, none in her family. She began to sculpt her walls. Now, you or I am a creative man. Many people are. I might choose to illustrate my life creatively with art. But what she did was brought the world that she was missing outside in. And it was a world of beauty, of whimsy, of color, of delight. That was the message. And that is the message that I found again and again and again. It's a particularly poignant one, but it's ways in which women find means to convey for their families, for their community, and for their children going forward, ways to bring beauty and a loveliness into their lives, even despite,
and of course,
the issues that might be happening and are happening within that.
Of course,
and it's
yes.
that message that ties back into music, Ram. Music is another way in which it's conveyed. But I was really speaking less about music, although I'm very involved with it, than physical art, painting, women who paint their walls or their floors, or just do patterns within the gobar mitti, the mud floors of their homes, the ways in which they would spin or weave or carve, or whatever it is that they do is a means to bring beauty into their lives in what might otherwise be what could be considered a dour experience. I find the people of India, and have from my first experiences that continue on today, to be people who are vibrant with life. I find that much, much less so in the United States, North or
just before we go on to other, before we go on to other points, Stephen, I do want to point out to our participants that you have actually published books, a book on Sonabai, which is a book of the exhibition that you created. And I'd love you to speak a little bit about the exhibition, because I think it's an important exhibition. And it'd be lovely for us to know, those who don't, what you've done to bring Sonabai's voice and her art to the world, not just to write about it in some little way.
My work has been doing a cross-cultural survey, comparing and contrasting, and I don't, by definition, work with one person or one culture. I compare and contrast. However, Sonabai's story was so evocative, it was so strong, that I needed to do something. So I wrote a monograph and did a film that's been award-winning, and did a traveling exhibition, which I believe is coming to India in the next couple of years again. In other words, it came from India, it's going back to India. The entire collection will be given to the Indian people.
But where has it been meanwhile? And what did you do in order to create?
San Diego, in Michigan, in Alabama, in Ohio, elsewhere. But it's really, and then the film has been all over the world because it won 5 International Film Festival awards. But for Best Documentary. But it was really the It's not about me. It's about that. It's about that story and the vitality of the story, that in a world that we are taught. I mean, my God, look what's happening right now, this week, today, in our global political sphere. We are taught that there's no way out, that we will not. How can we survive? How can our planet survive? How can our culture survive? What are we threatened by at all times by everyone? While as the message of Sonabai is, we can use our own creativity. We can draw on our own resources. She had nothing. She had nothing. She couldn't go outside. She could get no exterior resources. And she created an environment of extraordinary beauty and delight. We can change our world. We can and change our environments if we're willing to use our own creativity and our determination and make the change. And Ram, that's what you've been doing. We can do that. The message of the Sonabai story is that I do write about it in my book that you've kindly published, the Transformed by India. But it's that quality. I could read that if you wanted, but there may not be time. I didn't realize that we were going to be reading, but I could read about Sonabai if you want.
While you're finding the page, Stephen, can I just bring Ram in briefly while
Please.
you find the page? Have you found the page already?
No, please.
No. So while you're finding the page, let me just turn to Ram. Ram, in what ways have all these diverse experiences in, obviously, Kenya, yourself, and then in England, and then obviously in international travel, what would you say has been the single most important way in which you have been changed by all these international experiences?
The way in which I have been changed?
Yes.
Yeah. Because in one sense, I can say, look, I've sort of driven for change, but in what way have I been changed? In many ways. I've had prejudices, okay? When my whole journey started, I was prejudiced, for example, against Christians because I was brought up in the Hindu faith, educated in a Muslim school, so no prejudice there. The family, I was shocked. The family sent me to a Muslim school, even despite what happened in Pakistan and British India. They sent me there, brought up in the Sikh faith. So I had all that. But the one prejudice I had was this whole Christian thing, white man's religion. I don't want anything to do with it. So that had to be broken in me because, again, in the spirit of oneness, in the spirit of, look, they may be different, but at least have an open mind to find out what it's about before you prejudge. And, the prejudice is such a strong thing. And I was prejudiced. And for me, then making the effort to read the Bible, to understand it, to research it, to check out its validity, to go to the British Library, all that. But I had to put the work in, and it changed me. When it changed me in one sense, but of course it caused another change. It made me think, how do I challenge what is being communicated? Because I'm seeing a very Western culture in what is being communicated to me. So where my change came is, how do I understand this in my culture and yet see how accepting it can be? So, it's like building a bridge. And so it made me, it challenged me about being open to it, but it also challenged me to say, now, don't just say, oh, it's Western, it's white, it's, I imagine Jesus as a blue-eyed, blonde, white man from the city of London with a pinstripe suit and bowler hat, all right? Now, so you can easily criticize stuff. So what can you do to begin to build that bridge of oneness? So I knew the biggest challenge was, how do I share with my mother that I'm now exploring this new faith? And I had to learn Sanskrit words from basics and communicate to my mother that what I was dealing with was the Sanatan Satguru. And, then she cracked, then she understood. So for me, it was about being challenged, not just writing things off. So the big change for me was, now open your mind and heart to understand what the differences are. Now seek to communicate it so that all who you deal with can understand it. And I think that has been a very big thing for me. Thank you, Brett.
Yeah, thank you. Stephen, have you found your page?
I just found, that I hadn't realized I was going to be reading today. So really, it's only the opening paragraph, which is
That's
short.
fine. That's
Otherwise,
fine.
into the complexities of creating an exhibition
Yeah, yeah, sure.
and public responses in different places, et cetera, but it's not cohesive. I entered a world of magic, of whimsy, of utter delight. This home was unlike anything I had ever experienced, virtually different from all other buildings in India. It was created solely by the imaginative, inspired vision and talent of one woman in the depths of oppression. It symbolized her positive solution to an untenable position. Experiencing it changed my life.
Wow.
I,
Wow.
I,
Wow.
I've just realized that it's, as you were speaking, Ram, I got captivated by what you were saying. It was hard for me to look up what I might read. Uh, for me, that experience of being in Indian homes, of watching the way that the woman is the center of the home. It is the woman that governs and decides the family's choices on what they're going to become, but it's also the woman that directs and facilitates all of the worship within the traditional Indian family. And so it was sitting quietly on the sidelines, being accepted in those homes, and as a family, from a family of very strong Christians, where many of my ancestors were of the cloth, were you know, and
Priests and missionaries and whatever.
yes,
Yeah.
and part of my heritage was an expectation that it's a part of my growing up was to become that. Was to witness a very different form of belief system and realize that it is deeply moving. I learned to witness God, to witness the divine in the homes of Indian people and in the shrines of community that honor community in ways I could never have expected. And that is not coming as an American who wanted to go to ashrams or sit at the feet of a guru. Quite the contrary, not at all. I wanted to feel the pulse of the people of India. That's what I still do. But it was watching and learning through their experiences, their eyes, watching and listening enough, being quiet enough that I could get past my own Christian background, which was channeled in one kind of direction, and recognize that God is available in many forms, and that I could learn from that. My transformation has been that as much as anything. When you're talking about the one and the many, how can I not bring that in? That I, as you have learned to find God in a different way than you were raised, Ram, I have been learned to listen to, witness, and watch and be transformed by the divine in ways that were inconceivable for me through my heritage.
Yes. So one of the books that I read when I was about 16 years old was a book titled Your God is Too Small. And
Yeah.
that, I think, is the common theme that's coming through, that, if there is a God, he or she is much, much, much greater than what we can imagine or
Yeah.
understand simply by being focused on one tradition.
Yeah.
Ram.
I mean, absolutely. When I met my wife, who became my wife, the Christians around me said, "Oh, but you've got to marry now a Christian since you also have met Jesus in this pub and you now want to follow him." But I struggled. I said, I can't, you guys are asking me to do something which is going to be very challenging. I can't, who do I meet? Where do I meet such a person? In the end, it took one person, a Sri Lankan, who said to me, the advice he gave me, he said, look, God's grace goes beyond any boundaries we've set for him. These people are all setting boundaries for you, which is going to make it impossible for you. Don't be fixed by those boundaries. Think beyond those boundaries. God's grace goes beyond that. And so I took the brave and bold step of proposing to my wife, who was not a Christian, with that faith that, look, they may be restricting it and limiting me by their understanding of what is right or not right. I'm going to do it and see where we land. God's grace goes beyond these boundaries that they have set. And it really did make the point. Once I met Sunita and we got married, things happened. She also began to see stuff in ways that were different to where she was brought up in a strict Hindu home. And both of us have ended up with a far richer and broader understanding of who God is and how we can worship him and what it means. The whole thing of language and culture comes in so wild, so powerfully here.
Good.
Yeah, and I would say that mine is the same. Excuse me, Prabhupada, mine is the same. I have been so deeply enriched. And my family was not closed-minded. It's simply that we were raised in.
Yep.
So there are many aspects of South Asian culture which are familiar to me. I have an extended family, and I know 130, 40 of my own relatives in ways that very few Americans do. And I feel at ease in Indian cultures because of it. But it's that quality of otherness being part that I can be open to, that I need not build. That's part of the subject that we're talking about here. What is it that separates me from you? What is it? And it's learning to listen, that each person, when I was asked in India on my book tour that just ended, is the one thing that I would bring? It's learn to listen. Learn to listen. And to accept each person as valuable as the next. Each person is vibrant with character and maybe something very different than I am accustomed to, but all the richer, all the more reason to want to know that person, or at least be open to her or to him, and to listen and learn.
Yeah, thank you. Ram?
Yeah, the other aspect is food. We've talked about music, Stephen. Food is another area. And my daughter, I was part of somebody who produced a play, The Far Pavilions, the book Far Pavilions, MMK, one of my favorite books. So a play was produced for the Shaftesbury Theatre. I was one of the people who was promoting it. And when that happened, my daughter invited a friend from college to the play, but it was going to be late night. So we invited the people, a young man and his sister, to stay with us. And I'll read you a bit from the book, just a paragraph which makes the point. Sunita and I weren't able to use those tickets, but our daughter, Nina, was studying at the London School of Theology at the time. We decided to give her as many tickets as she needed so she could take along a group of college friends. One of those friends was a young Swedish man called Jonas Kerlberg, who came along with his sister Frida. The show was finishing late. Because Frida and Jonas were due to be in Sutton the next day, we had invited them to stay at our home overnight. As we chatted over breakfast, the subject of food came up, particularly mangoes and Indian food, and we realized just how much we had in common. Oh, we love spicy food, Jonas grinned. We grew up in Nepal. I knew instantly that our curries would not bother him in the slightest, because I made a comment, which is not in the book. Oh, we have to be careful what we cook, Sunita, because, they're Swedish brother and sister. We make sure that it's not too spicy. He pipes up, hey, he said, he went to explain, his parents had been in Nepal, where he and his siblings had grown up. Before moving back to Sweden, Jonas had therefore lived far more authentically as a South Asian than we ever had. And as he and Nina's relationship deepened and blossomed into a happy marriage, we couldn't help thinking what a wonderful dovetail of cultures this was, how perfectly the backgrounds complemented one another. And so it goes on. So, food is such a powerful thing when we talk about music.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question along a different train of thought.
Sure.
As you've become more international, Ram, and as you become more Indian, Stephen,
yes.
What have you found most difficult to leave behind? Or put it differently, what do you miss most?
Probably the thing is, the reason I don't miss a lot is because I bring everything in. I just want it, so food, I'll try different stuff. Today I'll go across the globe and try everything and anything. So what do I miss most? it's a very difficult question to answer, because if I'm really honest, I so integrate what is around me that therefore it becomes part of my life.
You don't feel that you've lost anything, at least food-wise and music-wise, because you've just added other things to it rather than actually had to abandon anything.
Exactly. But I suppose what I do miss ultimately is, because the more you grow and the more you go on, distances happen. So like when we were in Kenya, or in even the family in India, the family all lived geographically together. That is huge. I miss that now in London, because everybody is separate. I have family who may be 13 miles away, but that's a 2-hour drive. How often can you do a 2-hour drive every day? And we were just at each other's doorstep. Mother, aunt, sisters, we were 15, 20 in the same place when we met on a Sunday, when we arrived as refugees. At any time, even though it was a 4-bedroom corner shop, imagine the typical corner shop in London, 30, 40 of us would be there, sitting on staircases and rooms and all, having lunch and dinner, all cooked in a tiny kitchen, a 6 foot by 6 foot. Now, I miss that. You ask me what I miss, it's that sense of togetherness geographically.
No.
I just
That's what I miss too. When I was talking about the closeness of the close-knit communication of families when I was accepted in, it's that too. But it's also we in the West, what I miss when I'm in the West is the sense that in India, I do not find a lot of judgment of the other person. There may be a separation. There is a separation of caste and a position, economic difference. There is in the West as well. But what I don't find, which I do find in the West, is judgment that goes with it. I do not find somebody, many people, saying that person is wrong. You are wrong. People have never said to me, I am wrong because I believed in a Christian belief system. No one has ever said that to me. No one has ever told me that my heritage or my way of doing things is incorrect or wrong when I'm in India. I find that all the time in the West. People judging one another as being less than, greater than, stronger than, better than, whatever it might be. I don't find that same kind of judgment. I still travel extensively in India. I travel all over the country, and what I do is listen, and I ask people questions, and I try to understand their answers. I find people, this isn't about me judging me, I'm talking about themselves. The way that somebody, they may have, it might be a certain Gujarati caste with a belief system that looks at God in this way, but those people will not judge the other person for his belief or her beliefs and the ways in which those manifest themselves. They may separate themselves, and there's a separateness, yes, but with it, there's a respect of the other person's belief systems and choices. That is what I find lacking in the West.
That was of course a mark of our culture till recent times. But in recent times, of
Till
course,
recent times, it's changed. It's changing.
Yeah,
it's changing.
Increasing intolerance, increasing attacks, and so on people of other traditions.
Absolutely. Yes.
So we value those aspects that were indicative of that sort of sense of one humanity, which is what marked Indian culture for thousands of years. But in order to move our discussion on in the last 3 or 4 minutes, may I invite each of you to think about one sentence about the following question, which has been raised actually in our chat. How can we pass on to others something of what we have learned in terms of, shall we call them intercultural skills? Shall we say, not just tolerance, because tolerance is too vague a term. What specifically can people do to encourage others? What you have done perhaps, but what you would like to do perhaps in the future. What specifically can be done to encourage others to have more of a sense of one humanity? What can practically be done?
Prabhu, to me, is by example. And especially by example, within my own family to my children, because they will see through straight away if I was being hypocritical, not living what I believe. So I believe it is living all these values we have been discussing in our lives and just making others aware of it. And starts with my family, starts with my children, starts with young people. And to me, that has been a very important aspect for me.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. Stephen.
And I would say the same thing, really. It's in this world that is so divisive, so conflictual. Live as much as possible the acknowledgement that there is love, there is caring, there is healing, there are good people, they are wonderful human beings out there who want to help humanity. We needn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can refuse to accept some political things that we really cannot live with, but we can live the answer, and the answer is.
And in practical ways, if you don't have a friend from a different economic level than yourself, go out and make friends with somebody from a different economic level. If you're from the right wing politically, please make sure you make at least one friend on the left wing. If you come from a particular religious background or atheistic background or whatever it is, make sure you have at least one or two friends from different religious or philosophical or whatever you want to call them communities. Nothing as powerful as having personal relationships with people from different backgrounds to enrich yourself and, of course, to enrich others as well. So I think we have explored various aspects of our lives. We've explored various aspects of our books. And I think we are more or less at the end of our discussion. I would like to thank both of you for your very powerful and charming contributions this session. And I would like to thank all our participants for being here. I wish there had been more questions addressed to you, but all the comments that I've seen so far have been very appreciative of your contributions. So thank you very much. And of course, the program will be on air, so I'm sure many more people will enjoy listening to you and benefiting from you. Let me just read one comment here. This is from Rajmohan Gandhi himself, the organizer of the whole series. He says, a remarkable conversation among wonderfully gifted people who are interested in all the people of the world. Thanks. And I think he speaks not just for himself, but actually for everyone. Here's another one. Your discussion has enlivened my train journey. Thank you. And here is another one. Thank you, Ram, Prabhu, and Stephen. Very helpful, enlightening, and indeed timely. On which note, thank you very much indeed.